Thanks for being here. I'm a veteran, as are most of the people who are standing here. When I was in college, I had left school and joined the Army because I wanted to serve my country. I never achieved high rank. I was an E4, but I did serve a tour in Vietnam. And one of the things I learned while serving is how important it is to have good leadership. Good leadership inherently means a commitment to do your duty, even if doing so requires personal sacrifice. Good leaders try to do the right thing and set the example, even if it puts themselves at risk. Unfortunately, Governor Walz has shown a disturbing pattern of avoiding his duty when the going gets tough. This was evidenced when he served in the Army and did not fulfill his service commitment. He retired early in order to run for Congress rather than deploy with his unit. His political aspirations took precedence over his duty to his unit and to his country. After he retired, he claimed a higher rank than he had earned in order to embellish his political resume. While rioters burned Minneapolis, Governor Walz refused to stand up for law enforcement, refused to do his duty to call for the National Guard to restore order, because doing so would have offended his leftist political allies. Political considerations took precedence over his duty to the citizens of Minnesota. Even in this campaign, Governor Walz has refused to engage in public debate and defend his policies and decisions that have facilitated an epidemic in crime, contributed to inflation, led to dramatic failure in our public schools. He's made the political calculation to figuratively hide in the basement rather than answer to the public. This pattern of behavior is disturbing and calls into question the governor's ability to do what is right for the people of Minnesota if it conflicts with his political ambitions. Veterans know that duty is important. Minnesota needs a governor that is committed to doing what is right for Minnesota, no matter the personal cost. And that's why we're supporting Dr. Scott Jensen for governor. I'd like to introduce the Deputy Chair of the Republican Party, Donna Bergstrom.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Donna Bergstrom. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps. I was commissioned as Second Lieutenant in December of 1987 through the Officer Candidate School. Over the course of my years of service, I had the opportunity to serve as a member of a promotion board. The board members are instructed to seek the best and most fully qualified when reviewing the promotion records. Every board precept will contain these words, and a board member is constantly thinking in those terms. My years wearing the uniform have ended, but I continue to use so many valuable skills learned from my military years, the promotion board experience being just one of them. When looking for future leaders, we must all seek the best and most fully qualified. Tim Walz is neither. I would point out, to echo the chairman's comments, that Tim Walz, in his own words, in an article in the Hill paper dated 11/12/2014 states, "I retired from the military 24 years later as a command sergeant major." Fast forward to this administration in 2020, knowing how, when, and why to deploy the National Guard, he let Minneapolis burn and did nothing. He sat by for the destruction of the Christopher Columbus statue on the Capitol. He locked down our schools, kept liquor stores open, but closed churches. His pattern over time displays a true lack of moral compass and a penchant for destroying the fabric of Minnesota. Tim Walz is far from the best, and even further from fully qualified to lead this great state. I'm a Marine veteran, an Ogichida Akwe, and I support Dr. Scott Jensen. Here to talk more about Tim Walz abandoning his National Guard unit is Command Sergeant Major Tom Behrens, who was called to replace Tim Walz when he left the military to run for Congress.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I'm retired Command Sergeant Major Tom Behrens from Brewster, Minnesota. I replaced Tim Walz, as she said, when he bailed out on his nation, his state, his unit, and his soldiers in May of 2005. Did anyone invite Governor Walz today? I'm sure he wouldn't have answered the call or showed up anyway. I would like to thank Liz Collin of Alpha News for contacting me in August to see if I was going to hang my Tim Walz is a traitor banner again on our bin. and her and Rick Bush for coming down for the hanging and the interview that day. Traitor, a person who betrays a friend, country, principle, etc. When I watched the cities burn during the riots, I thought to myself, thank God he didn't go to Iraq, where his indecision and poor decisions would have resulted in soldiers wounded or dead. Tim Walz re-enlisted for 6 years in September of 2001, with his retirement date of September 18th of 2007. He wanted a luxury deployment to Europe, at which I was on also. But when the going got tough, some ran the other way. In September 2004, he was conditionally promoted to Command Sergeant Major. After a few weekend guard drills and being notified we were going to war, he quit in May 2005. What kind of leader does that? I imagine many of us in here are going to retire at some time. Most of us probably know when that date's going to be. When Tim Walz decided to retire, there was no planned ceremony. There was no change of responsibility, handing the baton off to me, telling me things that I might need to know in my tour. There's no cake ordered. It was just, I'm out the door and I'm gone. Where was the supportive military wife? One of my soldiers, higher ranking officer, said his wife told him, "There's no way you're not going." I sent this information out in 2018 about his stolen valor and his failed leadership to 90 news organizations, and a few of them picked up on it, but it didn't get published because it would have tarnished the record that he had lied about to everybody. Then when the riots took off here, he finally called the National Guard after waiting several days. He said you couldn't just call them up. And I remember back in '92 when a tornado hit Chandler and wiped the town out, there was before cell phones, and we hit the phone tree, called all of our people out there, and we were there within minutes actually, and by nightfall we had the town secured, and we were ready to roll. And had the whole thing locked down so looters couldn't get in there. A lot of you out there in the media, if you were in there for 24 years and just doing a job of normal reporting out there, and the riots finally hit, and you were told, okay, it's your turn to go to the riots now, and if you ran the other way, what would the rest of the media think of you at that point? That's literally what he did when the going got tough. The last thing, I guess, is poor leadership in the military. It carries right over to poor leadership in the civilian world. It's time for new leadership in this state instead of no leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for sharing your story. The people of Minnesota need to hear this story, and they deserve to hear this story. It's incumbent on you guys to tell this story. What we see here is a profile in courage, not just Tom, but every serviceman and women who has served this country. As the son of a veteran, of someone who was not asked, but he was told that he was going to do 2 tours in Vietnam, I am eternally grateful to the men and women who have served this country. And we need to celebrate those men and women. We also need to remember that in leadership, attendance is not optional. Scott.
Thank you for coming. Why press conference? Arguably what we're doing today is we're trying to elevate for Minnesota the question of duty. It could be elevated in different ways, but obviously there's a problem in the next 6 weeks in terms of having an open, transparent campaign. debates have been shelved by Governor Walz, and he has been making all the rules. He does not want any debates in front of live audiences. He wants to be able to identify the localities and what media sources will have access to the live debate. This is problematic. So let's review. In 2005, a battalion called out. Where's our commander? In 2020, the Minnesota National Guard called out. Where's our leader? In 2020, Minnesota and media and TV journalists collectively called out. Where's our governor? The issue at hand is duty. The issue at hand is, are you going to lead and perform your duty, or are you going to blow with the political winds? Tom Behrens has essentially today submitted an affidavit of what he saw happen. And he was personally involved, because when that battalion in 2005 was expecting Tim Walz to lead the deployment to Iraq, and Tim Walz said, sorry folks, I gotta check out. Tom Behrens was the one who went. I think that what we're seeing is a question of, are we looking at political leadership? Are we looking at laziness? When does the absence of leadership hit the threshold where it should be a determining and defining factor in an election? Arguably, Tim Walz has been lazy. When it came time to having the hard conversations regarding how Minnesota would move forward in terms of energy and car mandates, he said, I'm going to glom on to the California car mandates. There's no reason for me to work with the legislature and try to come up with a tailor-made solution for Minnesota. Arguably, when it came time for him to release his green program, whereby we would have a completely carbon-free electricity grid in 2040, rather than tailor-make it to what Minnesota's real needs and problems are, he said, we're going to grab onto the United Nations plan. It just seems sort of lazy. Recently, we've seen the absolutely unbelievable expose of another situation with fraud. And again, we have seen Governor Walz commit a certain dereliction of duty. Several days ago, I called for Heather Mueller, the Commissioner of the Department of Education, to resign or to have her resignation requested by the governor. I saw no response at all. But I did see today on social media that Governor Walz did confess that when he was told that a judge said that the payments to this fraudulent activity needed to be reinitiated, he was speechless. Did Tim Walz or his commissioners appeal the decision? Did they say, hold it, we've had something flagged, we rose it up to the level of recognition and consciousness, let's deal with it? And the judge comes down and says, well, the way in which you stopped the payments wasn't appropriate, so you need to restart them. It was at that point in time that the governor should have gotten critically involved. Not today, when he calls for the investigation of Judge Guthman. That's what we've been seeing. We saw daycare fraud in Minnesota, and a year into Governor Walz's tenure, we saw the Inspector General regarding the daycare fraud transfer to another department, retain her six-figure salary, and have no disciplinary action. We saw homeless dollars for the homeless, millions and millions of dollars, not finding their way to solving the problem for the homeless. When it came to the Feeding Our Future program, frankly, the word speechless just isn't good enough. Andy Luger said that this was a pay-to-play fraud scandal, the largest in the country in regards to COVID relief programs. Attorney General Merrick Garland said the same thing. Arguably, what we're seeing today is an affidavit submitted by Tom Behrens, and it's getting the chance to see the light of day. But from the 30,000-foot view, what today really is an indictment of Tim Walz as leader of Minnesota. Whether you're talking about waste, whether you're talking about fraud, whether you're talking about an abusive relationship with the people of Minnesota he governs, or whether you're talking about his unwillingness to, in the hard times, lead and do his duty. In my eyes, today is the day that Tim Walz is indicted for lack of leadership and an unwillingness to do his duty. And Minnesota needs to know about it, and they probably won't learn about it through debates. We'd be glad to stand for some questions. Thank you. Thank you.
We can take a few questions if anybody has any for the candidates or for any of the speakers.
Sergeant Major, question, Behrens?
Yes, sir.
Can you remind us what the deployment was from the state of Minnesota Guard in 2005? What capabilities moved? How many people moved?
Well, at that time, the 1st Brigade was activated for the deployment. So a brigade is typically around 5,000. I think 3 to 5,000, depending on how the makeup of it is. It's a brigade combat team. It was kind of a new, they changed the format of units back then, but that's the size of the unit. And basically we went to Mississippi for 6 months of training, and then after the training was done, we were supposed to go for 18 months, for 12 months into Iraq, do security of the nation basically, and then once we were there, we got extended. So then our whole deployment ended up being 22 and a half months, 23.
Counting the Mississippi training?
Counting the Mississippi stuff. We're 16 and a half months in country, longest deployment of any unit over there.
And again, the capabilities were?
It was everything. I mean, we went there as a brigade combat team. Granted, I was an artillery unit, and ironically, we did not bring our cannons over there or our radar. I mean, we were supposed to more or less do security. So a lot of our heavy stuff got left back here in the state. But once we got there, we started getting shot at. So then we pulled some more old mortars out of the connexes that were there and started shooting them back at them, and that kind of got them to leave us alone. I mean, we literally left a lot of our heavy stuff back here. But brigade combat team is self-sufficient. You can go in and just do damn near anything you need to do.
Dr. Jensen, why bring this up now? It came up during his congressional campaigns, I believe. I know during 2018 when he first ran for governor, it came up. So it's not necessarily new, but are you trying to tie this into, as I think one of you referred to, as a pattern of a lack of leadership? I'm just trying to get at why this is coming up again now.
I think any time in human behavior we can see a one-off experience. I think we all know that. Someone maybe made a 45-foot putt and they'll never make another 45 putt in their life. But in this situation, we had Tim Walz in 2005, and the issue was raised in 2018. But in 2020, we saw a pattern emerge. Now it wasn't just a battalion in 2005 that had been abandoned. Now it was the Minnesota National Guard not being allowed or called on to do what they could have done in 2020 during the riots, arguably possibly preventing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of damage, and arguably also potentially not causing other cities across the nation to burn and to be, if you will, devastated. So I think when that happened, where the National Guard wasn't called on to, you have to ask yourself the question, what is the deep-seated relationship that Tim Walz has or doesn't have with the National Guard? And then when he finally did put the National Guard on the streets to help, he denigrated them by calling them a bunch of 19-year-old cooks, and a person who led the National Guard. These were people who looked up to him. I can't imagine what that felt like. I'm not a member of the National Guard. But at this point in time, I think that sort of confirmed it. And then when we saw the May 28th, Thursday, the 3rd Precinct building allowed to burn and if you will, be devastated, we heard, even as recently as the state fair, the governor referenced that the reason that happened was it was the best advice of law enforcement, seeming to deflect any blame from him, but instead saying, you know, this was the peacekeepers, this was law enforcement that basically made the call. And so I think at that level, you see this pattern over and over and over again. Whether you're talking about those who keep us safe from without or those who keep us safe from within, at both levels, we are seeing a pattern. I think the best way to have handled it, Tom, would have been for Governor Walz at a debate to take the 2 or 3 minutes that he needed and explain it. Because I think Minnesotans are a group of people that are interested in a transparent campaign and want to understand why did he do what he did. But I think that's why it's so critical that it come out now, because the 2020 thing exposed an awful lot. But then even as recently as the state fair, he's still blaming others for his dereliction of duty.
Senator, you turned 18 right around the time that the draft was going away. Did you think about serving, and if you didn't serve, how come?
My draft number was 27, and in early January of 1973, I was notified by the draft board in Brown County that I would report for my physical in May of 1973. And Henry Kissinger negotiated a ceasefire in January, late January of 1973, and shortly thereafter the draft was discontinued, and I was notified that even though my draft status had been converted from 1H, which was a high school deferment, to 1A, ready and raring to go, that I would not be reporting for a physical.
But you chose not to volunteer as well?
There was, at that point in time, the draft had ended, and I think basically, there were also no college deferments available at that time, but once they ended the draft, then I was able to attend college. So I pursued my medical career.
So you chose not to join?
Yes, if that's the words you'd like to use.
Scott, if somebody tells us that the unit got its special alert 2 months after the governor resigned from the Guard, would that be incorrect? Or would the Guard records be incorrect about that?
My understanding is that in 2001, Governor Walz signed up for another 6-year duty, and that during that time he actively pursued, if you will, promotions in rank, and he was able to achieve the highest rank that he could as an enlisted person. So that I think it was in 2004, in late 2004, the training for that began. So at this point in time, he was on the program to complete all the requirements of being a command sergeant major, and that sometime in early 2005 he was notified, or the battalion was notified, that they would be deployed to Iraq, and it was shortly thereafter that he resigned from the National Guard. Are you saying, John, that that timetable is incorrect?
The timetable we're hearing is that the alert came out in July.
July of which year?
July 2005, 2 months after he resigned. That's the timetable we're being.
I think that that's probably something that would be settled offline rather than at a press conference where we might have a variety of data to consider.
The NPR also reported that the governor, even though he could have gotten a medical disability because of his hearing damage from the cannons, fought to stay in the Guard.
My understanding is that he initiated the training requirements in 2005, somewhere in the late portion of the year. I'm not certain that there was if you will, a hearing loss insult to his hearing between September of 2004 and May of 2005. But if there were, that certainly would be data that needs to be considered.
Sir, can I briefly expound on that? The NPR article, yes, sir. The NPR article stated right in there that in 2002, when he went in front of the medical board, that they allowed him to stay in and finish the rest of his 6-year enlistment, which at that point would take him all the way into 2007. And going back to the deployment, the sourcing order was actually started in January. It was around March when I found out the warning order that stated that one of the 125 and the brigade was going to be going to war. And I was in Divardi at that time, Division Artillery, and I was like, well, that's not me, I'm in Division. So the 1st Brigade was notified, and that was in March, maybe late February, but then April rolled around, May rolled around in 2005, and then that's when the rumor came out that at this closed door meeting, Tim Walz left it and had quit.
So were you and Governor Walz in the 1st Brigade?
We were in the one of the, we were in, he was in the, we were both in the one of the 125 when we deployed to Europe. And then in 2004, I got promoted into the division unit, and he took over the slot in the one of the 125 field artillery. So the field artillery unit was in the brigade, and I was in division, which is one level above brigade. I mean, the brigade is underneath the division. So I was in Divardi. I was a staff sergeant major at that time, and I wasn't activated basically. I wasn't given a warning order because I was in a different unit. But then once he quit, since I was in one of the 125 before, I was like, well, the phone's going to be ringing because I'm probably going to get the call. So,
Sir, for those of us who aren't familiar, can you explain the difference between a warning order and an activation order? And what's the...
Well, I mean, those, you know, it's. I wouldn't say it's tough to remember the whole works back then, but like Paul Herr said in his podcast, he called it a sourcing order. You know, you could call it a warning order back then. I mean, the military's got different orders that go along. A warning order basically says, pack your bags, get ready, you're going to be going. We're not going to tell you exactly where right now. Prepare for war, and things are going to go forward. Then as the orders progress, then it's more specific. Okay, we're going to send you to Camp Shelby, Mississippi to train. The mission you're going to be doing is going to Iraq. I mean, the orders get more specific as they go on. The warning order basically is telling you, you know, get your stuff together and get ready to get out the door.
How many orders might you get as a enlisted person or a guard person between the time you're first inkling and the time you're actually sent out?
Oh, they kill a lot of trees. I mean, a lot of paper is used up in all those. I mean, but these specific broad-based orders are. I mean, they get out there like this warning order went to the brigade, and you know it's like wildfire the whole brigade. And I mean that's just everybody get back home and pack your damn duffel bags. You got to get ready for the war. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that he knew damn well what was going to be going on, and that's why in May he was gone. This whole July thing, that's the thing that I put in my petition to have him resign, was that him and his campaign fed lies to the NPR and Star Tribune back in 2018. Because I asked Pat Kulikan, I said, where'd you get this information? He said, well, his campaign gave it to me. And I said, well, it's just all a bunch of lies. I mean, and I've got all the evidence is out there. You look at my Facebook page or my Alpha News stuff that's out there, and on the petition that's out there. It's all laid out, and I've got all the documents to support every bit of it.
So the Red Bulls are a division, right?
The 34th Red Bull Division is what they are, yep.
And then the 1st Brigade is part
Is underneath it, yep.
underneath, and then the one of the 125 is underneath.
That's underneath the 1st Brigade, the 1st Brigade Combat Team, they call it, yep.
Chair, I have a question for you. Are we at the point in the campaign where if the gloves hadn't come off, they are definitely fully off now? Can we expect a drumbeat of this type of thing, questions about his military record, similar to the way the other side has a daily drumbeat about Dr. Jensen's record on abortion?
Well, I think as some of the speakers have said, to us it seems like there is a pattern here of a person who puts political calculations ahead of everything else. And instead of doing the duty that he has been asked to do, that he has signed up to do, he finds a way to decide what is politically expedient. And I think the evidence of that is in his military record, as well as how he handled the riots in Minneapolis and other instances as well. So I think that as an issue is important for the people of this state to ask themselves, do you want a governor who's going to always put his own political ambitions before the interests of the state? That is an important issue, and that is something that people of the state need to decide.
Dr. Jensen, your response to that too? I mean, is this fair game, even though it was many years ago, the same way they go after things you have said or done in the past?
Your point's well taken, Tom, and 2005 is 17 years ago. But 2020 is 2 years ago, and we saw that pattern of recurrence. And we saw it in a way that had Tim Walz handled the 2020 riots, utilizing the National Guard in a prompt and expedient fashion. That would have been one thing. If when he finally did it, if he hadn't tried to throw Jacob Fry under the bus and say, well, he didn't ask for support or assistance in the correct manner, but to denigrate the National Guard, this is a concern of Minnesotans